The frozen silence of the Sierra Nevada mountains shattered with a crack so loud it echoed across the valley like a gunshot. And Katherine knew she had mere seconds before the snow-laden pine came crashing down on top of her. She had been foolish to venture this far from Riverside, California in December of 1878. But the mare she had been tracking belonged to her deceased father, and it was the last piece of him she had left in this world. The horse had bolted 3 days ago during a supply run, spooked by a rattlesnake that had been seeking warmth near the wagon wheel. Sarah had followed the tracks into the mountains, ignoring the warnings of the shopkeeper who told her a storm was coming. She was 22 years old and had survived worse than a little snow. Or so she had believed until the blizzard hit with a fury that turned the world white and treacherous. The tree came down fast, branches whipping through the air as the trunk, weakened by ice and wind, gave way with a groan that sounded almost human. Sarah tried to throw herself clear, but her boot caught on an exposed root beneath the snow, and she went down hard. The impact of the massive pine knocked the air from her lungs and pinned her left leg beneath its weight. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and blinding, and for a moment she could do nothing but gasp for breath as snowflakes settled on her face like cold kisses. She tried to move, tried to pull herself free, but the tree was impossibly heavy. Her leg felt wrong, bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. The snow continued to fall in thick sheets, already beginning to cover the fallen trunk and her own body. Sarah realized with growing horror that if she did not get free soon, she would freeze to death out here, alone in these mountains, and no one would find her until spring thaw revealed her remains. "Help!" she called out, though she knew it was futile. She had not seen another soul since leaving the foothills. "Please, someone help me." Her voice was swallowed by the wind, lost in the vast whiteness. She tried again to shift the tree, pushing with all her strength, but it would not budge even an inch. Tears froze on her cheeks as panic began to set in. She thought of her small house in Riverside, of the medical practice she had been trying to establish against the protests of every man in town who believed women had no place in healing. She thought of all the things she would never do, never see, never experience. The cold was seeping into her bones now, making her thoughts slow and heavy. She knew this was how it happened, how people died in the snow. They simply got too tired to fight anymore, and the cold wrapped around them like a blanket, lulling them into a sleep from which they would never wake. Sarah forced her eyes to stay open, forced herself to keep calling for help even as her voice grew weaker. She did not know how long she lay there. Time seemed to stretch and contract strangely, and she found herself drifting in and out of awareness. At some point, she thought she heard hoofbeats, but dismissed it as a hallucination brought on by cold and pain. Then she heard a voice, deep and urgent, calling out words she could not quite make out through the ringing in her ears. "Hold on. I see you, just hold on." Sarah opened her eyes to find a man dismounting from a sturdy bay horse, his long coat dusted with snow and his hat pulled low against the wind. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving through the deep snow with the confidence of someone who had spent his entire life in wild places. When he reached her side and dropped to his knees, she saw his face clearly for the first time, rugged and weathered by sun and wind, with dark eyes that showed genuine concern. "How bad are you hurt?" he asked, his gloved hands already assessing the situation, running along the trunk to gauge its weight. "My leg," Sarah managed to say through chattering teeth. "I cannot feel it anymore." "That might be a blessing right now," he said grimly. He stood up and positioned himself at the thickest part of the trunk near where it had her pinned. "I am going to lift this. When I do, You need to pull yourself free as fast as you can. You understand? Sarah nodded, though she doubted she had the strength left to do anything fast. She watched as the cowboy set his feet, bent his knees, and got his hands underneath the trunk. His face contorted with effort as he began to lift, muscles straining beneath his coat. The tree rose an inch, then 2, then 6. Sarah felt the pressure on her leg lessen, and she pulled with everything she had, ignoring the screaming pain as her leg came free. The cowboy held the tree for a moment longer, making sure she was clear, then let it drop back into the snow with a heavy thud. He was at her side immediately, breathing hard from the exertion, his hands gentle as he examined her leg through the torn fabric of her riding skirt. "It is broken," he said, his voice steady despite the dire situation. "We need to get you out of this storm." "My shelter is not far, maybe a quarter mile. I am going to have to carry you. It will hurt." "I do not care about the pain," Sarah said, and it was true. The alternative was freezing to death, and compared to that, pain seemed almost trivial. The cowboy did not waste time with further discussion. He gathered her into his arms as carefully as possible, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. Sarah bit back a cry as the movement jostled her broken leg, but she wrapped her arms around his neck and held on. He carried her to his horse, a challenge in the deep snow, and she could feel the strength in his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing even under the strain. Getting her onto the horse was the hardest part. He managed to mount while still holding her, settling her in front of him so he could keep her steady with one arm while guiding the horse with the other. Sarah leaned back against his chest, feeling his warmth even through their layers of clothing, and for the first time since the tree fell, she believed she might actually survive. The ride to his shelter seemed to take both an eternity and no time at all. Sarah drifted in and out, aware of the horse's steady movement beneath them, of the cowboy's arm tight around her waist, of the snow that continued to fall without mercy. She heard him speaking to her, his voice a low rumble that she felt as much as heard, telling her to stay awake, to keep her eyes open, that they were almost there. The shelter turned out to be a small cabin, barely more than a single room, but it looked like paradise to Sarah's frozen eyes. The cowboy dismounted and carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them to keep out the wind. The interior was dark and cold, but he laid her on a narrow bed covered with furs and blankets, then immediately set about building a fire in the stone hearth that dominated one wall. Sarah watched him work, her mind still foggy from cold and shock. He moved with efficient purpose, laying kindling and adding larger pieces of wood, striking a match that flared bright in the darkness. Soon flames were crackling in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The cowboy fed the fire until it was roaring, then turned his attention back to her. "I need to get you out of these wet clothes," he said, his tone matter-of-fact and professional. "You will not warm up while you are soaked through." Sarah knew he was right, but modesty was a hard thing to set aside even in life-threatening circumstances. She must have hesitated too long because he added, more gently, "I am going to turn around. There is a dry shirt and some long underwear in the trunk at the foot of the bed. Get yourself changed and call me when you are decent. I will not look. You have my word." He was true to his word, turning his back and busying himself with heating water in a pot he hung over the fire. Sarah struggled out of her wet clothes with clumsy, numb fingers, pain shooting through her leg with every movement. The dry clothes were far too large for her, but they were warm, and that was all that mattered. She pulled the blankets up to her chin and called out that she was ready. The cowboy turned back around and brought the pot of warming water to the bedside along with some cloth strips. "I need to set your leg," he said. It is going to hurt worse than anything you have felt so far. I have some whiskey that will help dull the pain." "I do not drink," Sarah said automatically, then almost laughed at the absurdity of worrying about propriety in such a situation. "Tonight you do," he replied, and there was a hint of something that might have been humor in his dark eyes. He produced a bottle and offered it to her. "Trust me, you will want this." Sarah took the bottle and drank, the whiskey burning a path down her throat and making her cough. It was harsh and strong, but she could already feel it warming her from the inside out. She took another swallow, then another, until the cowboy gently took the bottle from her hands. "That should do it," he said. "Now I am going to tell you straight, this is going to be bad. I need to feel the break to see if the bone came through the skin. If it did, you are going to need a doctor, and I will have to get you to town once the storm passes. If it did not, I can set it here, but you need to hold still no matter how much it hurts. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded, though she was not at all sure she could. The whiskey was making the room spin slightly, which was probably for the best. She gripped the edge of the blanket with both hands and fixed her eyes on the ceiling as the cowboy's hands moved carefully over her leg, probing and assessing. The pain was extraordinary, a sharp and brilliant agony that made her vision go white around the edges. She heard someone crying out and realized dimly that it was her own voice. The cowboy worked quickly, his movements sure and practiced, and after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, he stepped back. "The bone did not break through," he said, and there was relief in his voice. "That is good. That is very good. I am going to splint it now to keep it stable. Just a little bit more, and then you can rest." Sarah could barely hear him over the roaring in her ears, but she felt him working, felt the wooden splints being positioned and secured with careful precision. When it was finally done, he covered her with additional blankets and pressed the whiskey bottle back into her hands. "Drink a little more," he instructed. "It will help you sleep." Sarah obeyed, too exhausted to do anything else. The pain in her leg had settled into a deep, throbbing ache that the whiskey could not quite touch, but it took the edge off enough that she could think again. She looked at the cowboy, really looked at him for the first time, as he moved about the small cabin checking the fire and securing the door against the storm. He was perhaps 25 or 26 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. There was a quiet competence about him, a sense that he was a man who knew how to handle whatever life threw at him. When he caught her watching him, he offered a small smile that softened his rugged features. "I am Zachary Norton," he said, settling into a chair he pulled close to the bed. "Most folks call me Zach." "Sarah Katherine," she replied, her voice thin and tired. "Though most call me Sarah or Dr. Katherine when they are feeling particularly scandalized by my profession." Zach's eyebrows rose. "You are a doctor." "I trained in San Francisco," Sarah explained, finding it easier to talk about this than to think about her broken leg or how close she had come to dying. "My father was a doctor, and he taught me everything he knew before he passed last year. I came to Riverside to open a practice, but the men in town would prefer I stick to nursing or teaching or getting married." "Their loss," Zach said simply. "A good doctor is a good doctor, regardless of what is under their clothes." Sarah found herself smiling despite everything. "You are unusually progressive for a cowboy." "I have seen enough of the world to know that judging folks by their parts rather than their character is a fool's game," Zach replied. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What were you doing out in the mountains in December anyway? These storms can turn deadly fast." Sarah told him about her father's mare, about following the tracks into the high country, about getting caught in the blizzard. "It was foolish," she admitted. "But that horse is all I have left of my father. He raised her from a foal, trained her himself. I could not just let her go. That is not foolish, Zack said quietly. That is love. There is nothing foolish about love. They talked as the storm raged outside, the wind howling around the cabin and rattling the shutters. Zack told her he was a rancher, that he ran cattle on the land between Riverside and the mountains, that he had built this cabin as a shelter for when he was checking on the herd in the higher pastures. He had been heading back to town when the storm hit, and decided to wait it out here rather than risk getting lost in the white-out conditions. If you had not come along, Sarah said, her words starting to slur as exhaustion and whiskey caught up with her, I would have died out there. But I did come along, Zack said firmly. And you did not die. You are going to be fine, Sarah. I promise you that. She wanted to believe him. She let her eyes drift closed, feeling safer than she had any right to feel in a strange man's cabin with a broken leg and a blizzard raging outside. There was something about Zachary Norton that inspired trust, something solid and dependable that made her feel protected. Sarah slept fitfully, waking often from dreams of falling trees and suffocating snow. Each time she woke, Zack was there, adding wood to the fire or bringing her water, checking her leg to make sure the swelling was not getting worse. He did not sleep at all that first night, keeping vigil over her like a guardian angel in cowboy clothing. By morning, the storm had not let up. If anything, it seemed to have intensified, the wind screaming around the cabin with such force that it shook the walls. Sarah's leg throbbed with a deep, bone-aching pain that made her nauseated, but she forced herself to sit up and take stock of the situation. How are you feeling? Zack asked from where he stood at the small stove, cooking something that smelled surprisingly good. Like I was hit by a tree, Sarah said, attempting humor though her voice came out weak. Technically, the tree hit you, Zack replied, and she saw the corner of his mouth quirk upward. He brought her a tin plate with beans and bacon, along with a piece of hardtack softened in the bean juice. It is not fancy, but it will keep your strength up. Sarah ate slowly, finding she was hungrier than she had realized. As she ate, she watched Zack move about the cabin, noting the neat and orderly way he kept his space, the care he took with his tools and supplies. Everything had its place, and there was a sense of someone who lived deliberately and thoughtfully. How long do you think the storm will last? She asked when she had finished eating. Zack looked toward the window, though the shutters were closed against the cold. Hard to say. Could be another day, could be 3. We have plenty of supplies, though, and wood enough to keep the fire going for a week if we need to. You are safe here. What about your cattle? Will they be all right? The herd is in the lower pastures where there is more shelter, Zack explained. I have men watching them. They know I am up here and they will not expect me back until the weather clears. Your folks, though, they will be worried about you. Sarah shook her head. I have no family left. My father was the last of them. There are colleagues who will notice I am gone, but they will assume I am simply snowed in somewhere. No one will be surprised that I did something they consider reckless. Zack studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. You must get lonely living like that, having no one who worries when you do not come home. I have my work, Sarah said, but even to her own ears it sounded hollow. The truth was she had been lonely for a very long time, even before her father died. Being a woman in a man's profession meant existing in a strange liminal space where she was neither fully accepted nor fully rejected, always having to prove herself, always aware that one mistake could end her career. Work is important, Zack said carefully, but it cannot keep you warm at night or hold your hand when you are scared. It cannot love you back. Sarah felt something flutter in her chest at his words, something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. She pushed it down, reminding herself that she barely knew this man, that she was only here because of an accident, that once the storm passed, they would return to their separate lives, and this strange interlude would be nothing but a memory. The days that followed developed a rhythm of their own. Zach tended to Sarah's needs with a gentleness that surprised her, helping her manage the necessities of being bedridden without ever making her feel diminished or helpless. He kept the fire burning and the cabin warm, cooked simple but nourishing meals, and changed the dressings on her leg with a competence that spoke of experience. "Did you work as a medic during the war?" Sarah asked on the third day, watching him examine her leg with practiced efficiency. "Not officially," Zach replied. "But when you are out on the range, accidents happen. I have set bones, stitched wounds, even pulled a bullet out of my foreman's shoulder once. You learn to do what needs doing when the nearest doctor is a day's ride away." "You did a good job with my leg," Sarah told him. "The splint is well placed and the swelling is already starting to go down. If I were treating myself, I could not have done better." Zach looked pleased by the compliment, though he tried to hide it. High praise coming from a real doctor. "I am a real doctor," Sarah said, hearing the defensive note in her voice and hating it. "I know you are," Zach replied seriously. "I did not mean to suggest otherwise. I just meant that it is good to know I did right by you." They talked for hours, passing the time as the storm continued its assault on the world outside. Sarah learned that Zach had been born in Texas, that he had come west after the war looking for a fresh start, that he had built his ranch from nothing through hard work and determination. He had never married, though he admitted there had been a girl once back in Texas who he had thought might be the one. "What happened?" Sarah asked. She wanted a man who would stay in one place, who would build a life in town with a shop and regular hours, Zach said, staring into the fire. "I tried to be that man for her, but I was dying inside, suffocating in that life. So I let her go and came west where a man can breathe." "Do you regret it?" Zach was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret hurting her, but no, I do not regret following my own path. We would have made each other miserable if we had married." Sarah understood that in a bone-deep way. She had had her own suitors over the years, men who wanted her to give up her ambitions, to be satisfied with being a wife and mother and nothing more. She had refused them all, unwilling to diminish herself to fit into someone else's vision of who she should be. "You think I am foolish," Sarah said one evening as they sat together. She propped up on the bed and he in his chair beside her. "Insisting on being a doctor when it makes my life so much harder." "I think you are brave," Zach said quietly. "I think it takes more courage to be yourself in a world that wants you to be something else than it does to ride into a gunfight. And I think the world needs more women like you, women who refuse to accept limitations that make no sense." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. No one had ever said anything like that to her before, had ever validated her choices so completely. "Thank you," she whispered. Zach reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "You do not need to thank me for speaking the truth." The storm broke on the fourth day, the wind finally dying down and the snow tapering off to scattered flurries. Zach opened the shutters to reveal a world transformed, everything buried under several feet of pristine white powder. The sun came out, blindingly bright against the snow, and Sarah had to shield her eyes against the glare. "We should be able to head back to Riverside tomorrow," Zach said, though there was something in his voice that sounded almost reluctant. "Give the snow a day to settle, and the trails will be passable." Sarah felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving the cabin, of returning to her solitary life in town. These 4 days with Zach had been strange and frightening, but they had also been something else, something she was afraid to name. She had felt less alone than she had in years, had felt seen and understood in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. That night, neither of them could sleep. They sat together in the firelight, not talking, just being present with each other as the hours ticked by. At some point, Zach moved from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed, close enough that Sarah could feel the warmth of his body. "I do not want you to go," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion he was not trying to hide. "I know that is selfish. I know we barely know each other, but these past days with you have been the best I can remember. You make me want things I thought I had given up on." Sarah's heart was racing, her breath coming fast. "What things?" "A partner," Zach said simply. "Someone to share my life with, someone who sees me as I really am and likes what she sees. Someone I can talk to about anything and everything, who challenges me and surprises me and makes me laugh." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes intense. "Someone like you, Sarah." "Zach, Sarah did not know what to say, her emotions a tangled mess of hope and fear and longing. "You do not have to say anything," Zach told her. "I know this is fast, maybe too fast. But I learned in the war that life is short and uncertain, and when you find something real, something worth fighting for, you do not let it slip away just because the timing is not perfect." Sarah reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I feel it too," she admitted. "This connection between us, this sense that I have known you much longer than 4 days. It terrifies me because I have spent so long building walls around my heart, protecting myself from being hurt, from being told I have to choose between love and my calling." "I would never ask you to choose," Zach said fiercely. "Your work is part of who you are, and I love who you are, all of who you are." "You love me," Sarah whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "I am falling in love with you," Zach corrected gently. "And I think I will keep falling for the rest of my life if you will let me." Sarah leaned forward, ignoring the twinge of pain in her leg, and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, tentative and exploring, but it held within it the promise of something deep and enduring. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Sarah saw in Zach's eyes a reflection of her own wonder and joy. "I want to try," she said. "I want to see where this goes, but you need to understand that my work is not negotiable. I am not going to give up being a doctor, not for you or anyone else." "I do not want you to give up anything," Zach assured her. "I want to support your dreams, to help you build the practice you want. Maybe we can even work together sometimes. My ranch employs 20 men, and they are always getting themselves banged up. Having a doctor who could come out regularly would be a blessing." Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Are you offering to be my first regular patient?" "I am offering to be whatever you need me to be," Zach said seriously. "Partner, friend, lover, patient, whatever helps you thrive." They talked through the night, making plans and sharing dreams, learning each other in the way that new lovers do. By the time dawn broke, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, Sarah felt as though she had found something she had not even known she was looking for. A sense of home and belonging that had nothing to do with place and everything to do with the man sitting beside her. The journey back to Riverside was slow and careful, with Sarah riding in front of Zach, his arms around her keeping her steady. Her leg ached with every step the horse took, but Sarah found she did not mind. She was acutely aware of Zach's presence, of his strength and his warmth, of the way he held her as though she were something precious. They stopped frequently to rest, and during one of these stops, they saw Sarah's father's mare grazing in a small meadow, apparently having survived the storm just fine. Zach managed to catch her with patience and gentleness, and they led her behind them as they continued toward town. "Looks like you got what you came for after all," Zach said with a smile. I got so much more than that, Sarah replied, turning to look at him with such open affection that it made his breath catch. When they finally rode into Riverside, it caused quite a stir. The town had been wondering what became of Dr. Katherine, and seeing her return injured and in the company of the rancher, Zachary Norton, sparked immediate gossip. Zach ignored it all, carrying Sarah straight to her small house and settling her on her own bed with the same care he had shown in the cabin. I am going to fetch another doctor to look at your leg, he told her, just to make sure everything is healing properly. I am fine, Sarah protested, but Zach was already heading for the door. Humor me, he called back. Let someone take care of you for once. Dr. James Miller came, an older physician who had been practicing in Riverside for 20 years. He examined Sarah's leg with thorough professionalism, then looked at Zach with something approaching respect. You did an excellent job setting this bone, he told Zach. Could not have done better myself. She will need to stay off it for another few weeks, but barring infection, she should heal up just fine. After Dr. Miller left, Zach settled into a chair by Sarah's bed, clearly intending to stay. I am not leaving you alone, he said before she could protest. You need someone to help you, and it is going to be me. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could manage on her own as she always had, but the truth was she did not want him to leave. What about your ranch? My foreman is more than capable of running things for a while, Zach replied. Besides, I already sent word that I will be in town for the next few weeks. They can reach me if there is an emergency. True to his word, Zach stayed. He moved into Sarah's spare room and took care of everything she could not manage herself. He cooked meals, kept the house clean, helped her with the necessities of daily life without ever making her feel helpless or diminished. More than that, he sat with her for hours, talking and laughing and continuing to learn the depths of each other. The town gossip reached a fever pitch. Respectable women whispered behind their fans about the impropriety of an unmarried man living with an unmarried woman. Men who had dismissed Sarah's medical practice now had even more reason to criticize her judgment. But Sarah found she did not care what they thought. For the first time in her life, she was putting her own happiness first, and it felt wonderful. Dr. Miller became an unexpected ally. He started referring patients to Sarah, particularly women who felt uncomfortable being examined by a male physician. He invited her to consult on difficult cases, valuing her opinion and expertise. Slowly, reluctantly, the town began to accept that Dr. Katherine was there to stay. 6 weeks after the accident, Sarah was able to walk without assistance, though she still used a cane for longer distances. Her leg had healed straight and strong, a testament to Zach's skill in setting it. As her mobility returned, she began to see patients again, and Zach was there to help, carrying medical bags and assisting when an extra pair of hands was needed. One evening, as they sat together on Sarah's front porch watching the sun set over the mountains where they had met, Zach took her hand and said, "Marry me." It was not phrased as a question, but Sarah heard the uncertainty beneath the confidence, the fear that she might say no. She looked at this man who had saved her life, who had cared for her, who had supported her dreams without trying to change her, and she knew there was only one answer she could give. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." Zach let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and pulled her close, kissing her with a passion that made her forget her healing leg, forget everything but the feeling of his lips on hers, and the solid warmth of his body against her own. They married in the spring of 1879, a small ceremony attended by Dr. Miller, Zach's ranch hands, and a few of Sarah's patients who had become friends. Sarah wore a simple blue dress rather than traditional white, and she insisted on standing throughout the ceremony despite her legs still bothering her occasionally. Zach wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable in the formal clothing but willing to endure it for her sake. The marriage changed some things and left others exactly the same. Sarah kept her practice, continued to build her reputation as a skilled and compassionate physician. Zach ran his ranch, expanding his operation and becoming one of the most successful cattlemen in the region. But they made time for each other, finding a balance that worked for both of them. Sarah moved to the ranch, which was larger and more comfortable than her small house in town. Zach built her a proper medical office on the property, with an examination room and a space for storing supplies. She rode into Riverside 3 days a week to see patients, and on the other days, she tended to the needs of Zach's ranch hands and their families. The men who worked for Zach quickly learned to respect Sarah, both as their employer's wife and as a skilled doctor. She treated broken bones and fever, delivered babies, and eased the pain of those beyond help. She taught them about sanitation and proper wound care, and slowly, the number of serious infections and complications began to drop. Zach was endlessly supportive, proud of his wife's accomplishments, and never threatened by her success. He bragged about her to anyone who would listen, and when some of the other ranchers made jokes about being bossed around by a woman doctor, Zach shut them down with a cold stare and a reminder that Dr. Katherine had saved several of their own lives. In the fall of 1880, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She had mixed feelings about it, worried that a child would force her to give up her practice, but Zach assured her that they would find a way to make it work. "Plenty of women do more than one thing," he said practically. "You are going to be an amazing mother and an amazing doctor." Their son was born in May of 1881, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. They named him Thomas, after Sarah's father, and he became the center of their world in a way neither of them had quite expected. Sarah took a few months away from her practice to focus on her son, but with Zach's help, she was soon seeing patients again, sometimes with Thomas sleeping in a basket beside her examination table. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. Sarah's practice thrived, and she became known throughout the region as one of the best doctors available, male or female. Zach's ranch prospered, and he earned a reputation as a fair employer who took care of his people. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Elizabeth in 1883 and another son named William in 1885, and their home was filled with noise and laughter and life. On quiet evenings, after the children were in bed and the day's work was done, Sarah and Zach would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked, sharing the details of their days and making plans for the future. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked one such evening, many years after that fateful day in the snow. "Marrying a woman who refuses to be just a wife?" Zach turned to look at her, his dark eyes warm with love and amusement. "Not for a single second. You are exactly who I fell in love with, Sarah. Strong and stubborn and brilliant and brave. I would not change a thing about you." "Even when I get called away in the middle of the night to deliver a baby," Sarah teased. "Even then," Zach confirmed. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I knew what I was getting into when I asked you to marry me. I wanted all of you, not just the convenient parts, and I have never been disappointed." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a contentment so deep it almost hurt. She thought about that day in the mountains, when she had been trapped and freezing and certain she was going to die alone. She thought about how Zach had appeared like a miracle, strong enough to lift the tree that pinned her, gentle enough to carry her to safety. She thought about everything that had come after, the love they had built together, the life they had created. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For saving my life, for loving me as I am, for giving me everything I never knew I wanted." Zach pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You saved my life too, you know. Maybe not from a fallen tree, but from a loneliness I had almost convinced myself was normal. You showed me what it means to truly share your life with someone, to be partners in every sense of the word." They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, diamonds scattered across the velvet sky. The mountains loomed in the distance, snow-capped and eternal, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. Somewhere out there was the cabin where they had spent those first precious days together, where they had learned each other and fallen in love. Sarah liked to think it was still standing, a shelter waiting for the next traveler caught in a storm. Their children grew up strong and healthy, shaped by the example of parents who worked hard and loved deeply. Thomas became a rancher like his father, taking over the operation when Zach decided to slow down. Elizabeth followed in her mother's footsteps and became a doctor, studying in San Francisco as Sarah had, and returning to practice alongside her mother. William became a teacher, opening a school on the ranch property where the children of cowboys and neighboring families could get an education. Sarah practiced medicine well into her 60s, finally retiring only when arthritis in her hands made surgery impossible. Even then, she continued to consult and advise, her experience and knowledge sought after by the younger generation of physicians. She had lived to see the medical profession open up to women, had trained several female doctors herself, had proved through her work and her life that gender had nothing to do with competence or calling. Zach remained by her side through it all, her partner and her love, the man who had lifted the tree that trapped her and opened a path to a life beyond anything she could have imagined. He stayed strong and healthy well into his 70s, still riding out to check on the herd even when his grown children begged him to slow down. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in the spring of 1919, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was a grand celebration, with food and music and dancing, with speeches and toasts and more love than any one room should be able to hold. Sarah looked around at the faces of the people they had created and raised and helped shape, and she felt such overwhelming gratitude it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Zach asked, pulling her close for a slow dance despite the fact that his knees protested any kind of movement that involved grace. "I am thinking about that day in the mountains," Sarah said, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "How I thought I was going to die alone, and instead I found you. I found everything." "We found each other," Zach corrected gently, "and we built something beautiful together." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She held her husband close and swayed to the music, surrounded by the evidence of their love, by the legacy they would leave behind. She thought about the girl she had been, so determined to prove herself, so afraid of being diminished by love. She thought about how wrong she had been, how Zach had shown her that the right partner does not diminish you but makes you more fully yourself. They had fought for their love in a world that did not always understand or accept it. They had built a partnership based on respect and support, and the recognition that both of them were whole people with dreams and ambitions that mattered. They had raised children who understood that love was not about fitting into prescribed roles, but about honoring each other's authentic selves. As the party wound down and the last of the guests departed, Sarah and Zach walked slowly back to their bedroom, leaning on each other for support in a way that was both literal and metaphorical. They had been leaning on each other for 40 years, taking turns being strong when the other faltered, and Sarah could not imagine facing life any other way. "I love you," she said as they settled into bed, her head on his shoulder as it had been so many nights before. "I love you too," Zach replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who did not have much to offer except his whole heart." "Your whole heart was everything I needed," Sarah whispered. She kissed him softly, a gentle kiss that held within it the weight of 40 years of shared moments, shared joys, shared sorrows, shared life. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, and if Sarah dreamed of mountains and snow and a tree crashing down, she also dreamed of strong arms lifting it away, of being carried to safety, of warmth and firelight and the beginning of the greatest love she had ever known. Zachary Norton passed peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1921, at the age of 68. Sarah held his hand as he slipped away, whispering her love and her gratitude, promising him that she would be all right, that he had given her everything she needed to face whatever came next. She mourned him deeply and honestly, not trying to hide her grief or pretend she was stronger than she felt. But even in her grief, Sarah felt grateful. Grateful for every moment they had shared, every conversation and every kiss, every challenge they had faced together and overcome. Grateful that she had been brave enough to accept his love, to build a life with him, to let herself be vulnerable and open in a way that had once terrified her. Sarah lived another 12 years, surrounded by family and friends, still offering advice and wisdom to anyone who sought it. She spoke often of Zach, keeping his memory alive through stories and remembrances, making sure their grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew what an extraordinary man he had been. When Sarah Katherine died in 1933 at the age of 77, she was remembered as a pioneering physician who had helped open the medical profession to women, as a loving mother and grandmother, as a pillar of her community. But those who knew her best remembered her as one half of a legendary love story, as the woman who had been trapped beneath a fallen tree and found in her rescue not just survival, but everything she had never known she was looking for. They buried her beside Zach on the ranch they had built together, beneath the shadow of the mountains where they had met. Their children commissioned a headstone that bore both their names and a simple inscription that Thomas had suggested: "Partners in all things, together forever." And if sometimes, on winter nights when the snow falls heavy and the wind howls through the mountains, travelers caught in storms find shelter in an old cabin and feel strangely comforted, as though they are not quite alone, well, perhaps that is just coincidence. Or perhaps some loves are so strong they echo across time, offering warmth and safety and the promise that even in the darkest moments, rescue might be just around the corner.